growing up, it was like the biggest deal too. You know, like keep your style sheets separate, don't inline anything. And now it's all just taken this like 180-degree turn back to like 2003.
Welcome to React Native Radio, Episode 2. Today we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hi, everyone.
Kevin Old.
Hello, everyone.
Jed Watson.
Hey, everyone.
And our special guest today is Charlie Cheever.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Can you tell us a little about the project that you have working on or the company that you have that deals with React Native?
Cool. Yeah. What I'm working on, along with James Ide, is called Exponent. And it's basically two pieces of software. One, you download to your desktop. We actually have a Mac version right now, but we'll have a Linux and a Windows version pretty soon. And it's kind of a one-stop shop for getting started with React Native development. You just open up the desktop software, and then you open your text editor and edit the code and start going. We have sort of a template that we start you off with. And then we also have a client app for iPhone right now. We'll have Android soon, where you can view anything that you write. And you can also view stuff that other people have written. So it's pretty much the fastest way to go from having nothing to viewing something on your phone or having something you can share with other people on their phones. And you can take those things and turn them into real apps that you can publish in the App Store. And you can also just view them through our app if you don't want to take the extra time to go do that. So it's pretty cool so far. There's some stuff that people have made. Peter Pikarczyk made a React Rally schedule in the middle of the conference. I think it took him about an hour. And then everyone who had access to the app, which is in the App Store, was able to just view the conference schedule right away without having to wait for App Store review process, that kind of stuff. And we put out Brent Vatney's newsletter every week, a React Native version, so that if you sort of like the nice scroll physics and stuff like that. Brent also helps us out sometimes with the project. The last couple of days, a guy's been working on like a Flappy Bird type game, so that's kind of cool. I think he's not quite done yet, but there's a pretty wide array. Anything you can make in React Native that doesn't require native modules, you can build an Exponent without having to deal with Xcode or any of that stuff. So that's pretty much the basic overview.
So Charlie, what gave you the idea to fix like an Exponent?
So I have been thinking about this for a while, because the last thing I worked on is I worked on this thing called Quora. It's like a question and answer website. You might have seen it if you Google for stuff, and then it comes up in search results. And some of you probably get the weekly emails. So I was working on that, and we started off as a website because we started that in 2009. But then pretty soon after that, like somewhere around mid-2010, we realized, hey, everyone is getting mobile phones, and that's a big deal. We should probably have an iPhone app. So I got one of our engineers, one of our designers together, and they basically took our mobile website and put a tab bar around it. And it's a little more, they did a really good job. That sort of understates the work they did, but it doesn't too much understate it. But it took about 9 months, just because, especially back then, like pre-Arc and stuff like that, it just took a really long time to build anything on iPhone. And no one at the company really had any experience, so we were kind of starting from scratch. So that was fine. And it turned out to be really popular, and a lot of people were using it every day and writing stuff on it, which surprised us because we thought it was too hard to type on the phone, but it turns out it wasn't. And so then after a while, we saw it like growing and growing as a piece of traffic. And so then we were like, well, we better make an Android app too. So we basically took the same design from the same designer, got an engineer who had experience with Java, and I thought it would go much quicker because, we already sort of had the design decisions figured out for the most part and had tweaked the mobile website so it fit nicely into like some native scaffolding, etc. And it took like another 9 months just because Android is just more annoying and less mature and more fragmented, especially back then. I think if you wanted to support older versions, they were very different. But then once we had that, it became sort of something that we were worried about, where do you slice your work up sort of by platform, or do you do it by product feature? And so you kind of want to have somebody who's working on like the question screen or the question page and have them sort of own that. Or maybe that's too big a piece, and maybe they own maybe there's 3 or 4 people that own just like comments on a question or something like that. But then when your technology stacks are like these totally split parallel things, you end up wanting to say, well, like, let's have an iOS team and an Android team. But then you kind of have to have like a product manager who has everything in their head about what the product's supposed to be, and then kind of farms out work to these two engineering and design teams who then implement it. And your iteration cycles get really, really slow. And if your product drifts, and so you have differences between your Android and iOS versions, then you constantly have to sort of figure out how to resolve these things where, oh, we've used the long press gesture already for something else on Android. So yeah, that's a good idea if we were just looking at iPhone. But now, no, we can't use long press for that. We have to use something else. So a bunch of problems with that. And I really felt strongly that it was important to have one code base that targets both platforms. And so after I left Quora, I spent about a year sort of looking into trying to make HTML5 based stuff as good as it could be. And I just sort of concluded that was a dead end. And so James and I started working on basically using JavaScript, because on iPhone you have JavaScript core through UI Web Views or through just JavaScript core. And then on Android, obviously you have access to V8. You can put JavaScript core on it. You can do anything on Android. And we started to build a system that looked a lot like React Native, except that we didn't know about React Native yet. So we spent a few months working on that, just the two of us. And then React Native came out, and we realized they were sort of ahead of us down the same path. So we just embraced that and then started building out everything else we wanted to build to sort of solve this problem of it just takes too long to make stuff on mobile and it's too important. So we really wanted to make it as easy as possible to build like one product that you can build really, really fast and iterate on really, really quickly and target iPhone and Android and distribute it as quickly as possible and update it whenever you want to. And we also just really wanted to open up this long tail of stuff where, like, I think the React Rally conference schedule that I mentioned that you built, Peter, I think is a really good example of something that you'd never build an app for that, because it would just, the overhead is just too great. It would take too long to build. It would take too long to get approved for the App Store. And people don't really want a separate thing on their home screen for something they're only going to use for 2 days. It only has like 2 pages of content on, but it's actually really valuable for those 2 days. So if there isn't a way to make it, it's pretty sad. We really want to enable this sort of long tail of lightweight content, but that feels really native. Because I think mobile web browsers feel really unsatisfying for about 10 or 15 different reasons. That's kind of how we ended up doing where we are.
What are the advantages of developing with Exponent as opposed to just going directly with React Native? I know you mentioned the deployment to the App Store, timing and things like that, but what else do you think would be something worth mentioning?
I think for people who are coming from iOS development already, it's not really a big deal to get set up with React Native. But if you don't have that background and you're not really comfortable with Xcode and these kinds of things, it's a lot quicker to get going with Exponent. In the sense that, we put up a screencast the other day on our website that shows and I think 3 or 4 minutes downloading all of our desktop tools, opening them up, starting a new project, making a small change to it, and then loading it on a phone that the client app's been downloaded on. And the whole process, including download times, only took 3 or 4 minutes. So you can get started really, really quickly without knowing that much stuff. And then the other thing that I think is a really big deal is just being able to share it with clients and things like that. It's we work with this guy, Brent Vatney, sometimes, who's up in Vancouver. And so when we work together, he'll often just send us a link to something that opens up in Exponent. And he can say, hey, what do you guys think of this? Or do you think that, does that image gallery zoom out too quickly? Or is it too slow? Or does that curve feel good? And then we can say, hey, no, that feels not quite right. What do you think about this? And then send a suggestion and you can change it really, really quickly. And so for anything where you're working with remote people or trying to collaborate, it can be much, much faster. One thing that we do that's built into our desktop software is we sort of turn your computer into a world accessible app server. And so as you're developing, you can just it gives you this link and you can send that link out to anyone who has the client app and they can just load it immediately. So it's actually it's mostly a really good development tool for collaborating with yourself, because it's quicker to get stuff onto the phone than rebuilding the app or remote people.
That sounds like a pretty interesting alternative workflow for when you're prototyping a user experience to something like InVision, which is something that we use a lot internally to go from design to, a semi-interactive prototype. It's not like, often when you're looking at a user experience and prototyping it, it's not a lot more work to just set up a few React components, particularly with stuff like the animated features that they've brought out in June. Being able to actually quickly deploy that sort of thing as easily as an InVision app sounds pretty compelling.
Yeah, and I think the really cool thing there too is you're not sort of doing the work twice. Like you can actually take what you've prototyped and then continue down that path and actually turn it into your real app or whatever else you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, prototyping for the web is something that we got good at over a number of years, and it's cool to see tools like this coming out for mobile as well, because there's often a really big disconnect between the kind of animations you can create in a prototype, or even if you're looking at something in Sketch and using Sketch Mirror to preview it on the device, the way it actually looks and feels when it gets turned into code, or, even whether you can turn it into code if you've got a designer who's not as familiar with working for mobile. Like you kind of get some uncanny valley stuff going on. It's great to be able to prototype in something that's, like you said, not throwaway and also reflective of the tools that you've got to work with in the implementation stage.
Mm-hmm. So what is the future for Exponent? Like what do you guys have planned down the road, or do you guys have a plan as far as what you guys have going on?
Yeah, so we're working on our biggest thing we're working on right now is the Android client, so that you'll be able to load stuff up on iPhone and Android. I think that's actually going to be a big deal because you sort of asked why use Exponent instead of setting up React Native, the sort of traditional way. And I think that like the answer on iOS is that it just saves you some time and it's easier. But once you start having to worry about iOS and Android, that becomes sort of like one problem plus another totally separate problem. And Android's like, frankly, just a bit hairier in a bunch of ways, partly because the React Native stuff for Android is just not as mature, not as well done yet. And partly because Android is just sort of overall just a bit gnarly of a platform. So being able to just kind of get set up in a cross-platform way pretty much instantly, I think, will be a really big deal. And also just being able to share something, like you could make something once and then share it with people on iOS and Android immediately.
Do you guys
that's our biggest thing right now.
Do you guys have plans to support native or bridged components?
Yeah. What we basically want to do, right now we don't have too much in the way of that. We have basically a custom font loader, because one of the limitations of Exponent is that you have to basically use sort of plain React Native stuff, or everything has to be loaded over the network. So all your images have to be remote images, nothing bundled, because there is no sort of app bundle. So nothing can be bundled in there. And for fonts, we made a way to load those over the network as well. But we want to basically cover all the common use cases with really solid modules. So that basically means access to all the peripherals like camera, GPS, maybe gyroscope, motion sensor, stuff like that. And then things like an inline video player and really common stuff like that. Probably the Bluetooth stuff. And then we also want to add facilities for like push notifications, which will be a little different on iOS and Android because they work differently. But we think we can sort of gracefully unify those and let you exercise the power of both platforms while still like sharing an API.
But would those components have to be provided by Exponent?
We're basically like sort of editorially choose what we think are the best implementations for those things, and bundle them into subsequent versions of Exponent.
Can you talk a little bit about the reasoning for almost curating the set of components that are in between Exponent and the device?
Yeah, so I mean, we can't put everything that's released in the world into it. Because we have to put it in advance, basically, into the app, because, people have to download the client and then that client should be able to view every Exponent experience. And so like, we want to keep the app from being we don't want it to be hundreds of megabytes big. And we also just want it to be a fairly consistent experience for the most part. So we're basically like trying to figure out what's like the best camera component that has an implementation that works across iOS and Android, and then get that in. And so we want something that's like highly customizable, but mostly customizable through JavaScript. We'll basically like start with the most common use cases that we think people have and work our way down and try to support something in the 80 to 90% range of like use cases that people have. So if you have some really, really particular hardware thing that you're doing with like sensors that are only available on like the latest iPhones or something, we might not support that. But for anything that's sort of common to many, many apps, like accessing your camera roll, accessing the camera, playing videos, motion sensing, GPS, everything like that, we'll try to have a solid solution for you that lets you do pretty much everything you want controlled through JavaScript. But we also don't want to have like 7 different ways to do the camera, because part of what we're trying to do is create this really quick, simple, and easy developer experience. So we just want to like have sort of one way that we vetted as like, you can trust that all the sort of native components within Exponent are like at least very good and ideally best of breed.
So it would be like a high quality version of React Native almost, right? Where you wouldn't have to worry about anything crazy. It would just work out of the box for you.
Yeah, that's the idea. And, over time we would keep working on it. So like, that's the plan. So if somebody comes out with some awesome new inline video player, we would work to quickly integrate that. And then if we'd keep the old one around for a while, but eventually deprecate it and move it out of the app.
So is white labeling something that you guys are thinking about? Because, there's a certain crossover threshold where you go from like being happy to have whatever your mobile app is, like you mentioned the React Rally schedule inside the Exponent app, which means, Exponent kind of acts like a group of apps on your iPhone. If you were then creating something like the Quora website, that seems like something that would probably be worth graduating to its own mobile app that people would actually have installed on the device. Is there an idea to take Exponent and make it so that you could build your own white label version that's still like a highly curated environment for developers? Or is the view just that at that point, it's worth graduating to React Native proper?
So right now, a lot of people basically do this where they work on something on Exponent and then they want to turn it into an app. So they take the same code and they just pull it over in a React Native project. And that's really easy to do, and it works quite well. So there's nothing stopping you from just taking your code and going over to sort of a traditional React Native App Store type app. We want to make that as easy as possible too, actually, because I think that's, as you're saying, like there's reasons you may want a standalone app just because on iPhone you want your app's icon with the push notifications. You want to have a home screen icon. You want to be in the App Store just for distribution and just because that's what like serious things do. So we don't want to stop people from doing that at all, and we want to make it as easy as possible. I think we'll probably eventually, this isn't like our top priority now just because we're focused on building out the Android client, but pretty soon we want to have sort of a one-click wizard type thing where you can take any Exponent experience and turn it into a real app, and just by filling out the sort of App Store metadata fields.
I think that's a cool idea. I think there's actually a lot of space at the moment around React Native for making it easier for people to, go from the really basic starter project that you can create on the CLI to automating some of the, I'm going to call them the more boring processes. Like every time we create an app, we then spend a little while going and setting up all the icons and, all the image assets for Xcode and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, especially for individuals that don't come from an iOS background. I personally had a lot of trouble wrapping around my head around things like routing and navigation. How do you import images? How do you get fonts set up? I had to do a lot of research on my own just to figure out how all that works. Because I was yeah.
So even just fixing the loading screen, the splash screen comes up and it's a zip file. If you want to drop an image in there instead and understand how to get that responsive to different device sizes, you actually need to understand how to use Xcode and write natively. You can't actually solve that from within React Native because React Native hasn't booted yet. So
yeah, absolutely. And even stuff, like the camera. I'm glad that you brought up the idea around the camera, Charlie, because I had to do the same thing. I had to dig around, write some really crappy Objective-C, and throw up my own camera view because it just wasn't possible with JavaScript. But it's just like little things like that I wish had a better process. I wish there was like a better ramp up period, and then just like, I don't know, I sort of wish these like concepts were more easily absorbed.
Also, part of what we're going to do with the modules that we include in Exponent is make sure that they're all cross-platform, because I think like all these things you're describing are problems, but when you get to this point where you're talking about graduating to being a serious app, you want to be on the iOS App Store and the Google Play Store on Android. And then now you kind of have double the problems, which is a lot of stuff to think about, basically.
Yeah, particularly if you, I mean, even if you're comfortable using Xcode, for example, and building iOS apps, or vice versa for Android, if there's a tool that can take I don't mean anything bad by this. I'm going to kind of call it a playground app, right, with Exponent, where you're prototyping, you're developing, and you're sort of working at that more simple, like getting started level, and then you want to graduate, having a streamlined process for that to go to iOS and to go to Android sounds like a really cool thing to have.
Yeah, and I think we really want people to be able to graduate without having to be iPhone or Android specialists. We want them to just have to only know React Native stuff to be able to go all the way from nothing all the way to being in both app stores if they want, or just being on the Exponent platform. Only writing JavaScript, basically.
Have you guys thought about implementing a way of navigation or routing with Exponent and React Native, just to kind of simplify that process?
Yeah, that's something we're pretty interested in, but we are still kind of thinking about it because we think it's like one of these things where if you set it up wrong, you might be stuck with that for a long time. So right now, the way we have it set up is that if you want, you can publish things to the Exponent hosting service, and that'll publish. It's sort of like GitHub. It's sort of, username / project name, like exp.host @ Peter/React Rally Schedule or something like that. And that's good for a top level navigation. We give you links to any Exponent experience, while you're developing, and then if you publish, we give you sort of a permanent link. But it's kind of an unsolved problem to an extent, linking within an app. So if you had a more complicated app that had a bunch of individual screens on it and you want to deep link into one of those, there isn't a clean, full solution yet. And the React router stuff is still evolving a little bit. And some of the navigation controller stuff is also still evolving. So that's something we want to get a real answer that we give to everyone, at least within Exponent, pretty soon. But we want to make sure that it's in line with everything else that's going on with the community and the way that React Native is going and the way that sort of Android and iOS work as well. So we're just being a little bit careful there. But if anyone has feedback or anything on that or an idea, just tweet at us at ExponentJS or reach out to me in our Slack channel or on Twitter or whatever.
How do you guys handle data? Do you rely on the fetch that's already included with React Native, or do you add anything on top of that so that you can control, maybe throttle what the app's doing? I imagine, loading any type of app in a groups sort of app like you guys are doing, or an app that can load multiple things inside of it, could open itself up for a lot of headache.
I was just going to ask a similar question, just to give you the full question before you start answering, around local data. Do you, or are you looking at any kind of sandboxing for async storage or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. So there's kind of two parts. One is the first part of the question, which is sort of remote data, and then the second is local async storage. Basically, for the remote data, we found that fetch and just making HTTP requests is pretty sufficient for almost every use case we've looked at so far. I think that won't be true for necessarily streaming video, perhaps, and some things like that. But by and large, I think just letting developers use the fetch command is probably right. And I think we also want to we don't want people using Exponent to feel like they're handicapped compared to regular React Native or building their own app, except when it's absolutely necessary. And so I think that we'll just sort of leave that wide open for the most part, although we may monitor data usage so that we can report on it to users and things like that. In the same way that if you go into the settings in your phone, you can often find out which apps are using the most data and stuff like that. But it's more about informing you than restricting the apps. And then on the local storage side, we basically want to take all the native modules that are in Exponent and create sort of scoped sandbox versions of them. Right now, we just give you access to async storage as it is in React Native. So the problem with that is that if you store any sensitive data inside an Exponent experience, someone else who knows what keys you're storing them under could just go access or overwrite those. So that it's a major security flaw if you're not aware of that. We're basically planning to build out these sort of sandbox versions of the modules so that you'd have your own section of local storage that you could use. And then if you wanted to access someone else's local storage, you would basically, there'd be some sort of API on the client that would let you get access to it if you were permitted by the other app, but not in some wide open way the way it is now.
I'd imagine that cookies are a related concern.
I think for right now, if there's any kind of web link or something like that, we just kick you out to Safari. And so that's a nice simplicity to solving that problem that way. But if we let you use sort of like in-app UI, if you were to invoke like a UI web view, that would be a case where those cookies would be shared across, all the different things using Exponent.
Charlie, I see that you chose React Native for this for a couple of different reasons, but aside from that, what do you think about the future of React Native as a platform in general?
I'm like pretty sure that almost all apps within 18 months to 3 years from now, people will be using React Native or something very much like it. It's just too painful to build iOS and Android apps the way that people have been doing it. It just takes too long. Layout is too much of a problem. Updating your code is too much of a problem. Collaborating is too much of a problem. Compile times get bigger and bigger. I know a lot of people are excited about Swift, but if you guys have used that at all, like once you get like 10 source files, you start to get very long compile times, and I think they're working on that. But as of today, it's a huge, huge problem. So I think that like people will want to write as much code in JavaScript as they can, and they'll want it to be cross-platform for the most part. And basically, React Native is sort of the best cut at that we've had so far. I don't think it's perfect, so it's conceivable that someone else could come out with something that's pretty similar but better in a few ways. And that but I think I'd say 80% chance that React Native wins this round and becomes the dominant technology. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I heard you mention the hybrid mobile situation and how you were bullish on that at one point and you kind of changed your mind. And the same thing is with me. For a while we were gung-ho about doing web views and hybrid and using Cordova and things like that, but we could never just get that native experience no matter what we did, no matter how hard we tried, how much time we spent. And once we saw React Native, we were pretty much sold. And the live reload with the compile times not being an issue, and then our whole team being able to work in JavaScript, all of that put together was a big sell for us.
I'm going to jump in here just because I feel like I kind of have to. I don't know if you guys saw any of the stuff that we did around React Europe or the talk that I gave there on hybrid apps. Basically, so did anyone see that before I'll just assume there are people listening who don't know what I'm talking about anyway. So basically, I think this is a thing that we've heard a lot where hybrid apps don't provide you with a good enough native-like user experience, and they're very hard to build. But we've actually been doing a lot of that in the last year with React in particular. We developed a framework called ExponentJS, and it provides a very, very native-like user experience. And I sort of wanted to get up and have a chance to actually talk to people about it at React Europe, because you hear that hybrid and web technology is not good enough, said a lot. And we believed that it was worth having a bit of an argument about that and saying, actually, it is possible, particularly with React, because once you've got that performance and that abstraction between what the UI should look like and making it so, we actually had, coming from previous Cordova experiences with things like Zepto and jQuery and Velocity driving the animations, we had really good experiences actually building native feeling mobile apps in React. And it's funny you mentioned the schedule and the conference app, because we actually built the React Europe app in Touchstone as a hybrid app, and everyone installed it and had a really good experience with it. It was quite a surprise to a lot of people in the audience that when I revealed that it was actually written in hybrid technology. So, I mean, having said that, here I am on a React Native podcast, and we're doing a lot of work with both hybrid and React Native, it's almost like the next generation of the hybrid concept, where you're still writing cross-platform code in a common engine and JavaScript, and then you're just rendering it to native components rather than to a web view. But I think it's probably worth having a look at probably the latest of what's actually available in newer APIs and frameworks like Touchstone and the stuff that the Ionic guys are doing before writing it off completely. I mean, I would love to see hybrid have a resurgence over the next couple of years as device power catches up and as the web platform continues to evolve. I think it would be sad to completely let go of that because there's a lot of benefits that it brings as well. Anyway, I didn't mean to sidetrack the episode. I just this is an area that we really put a lot of work into and actually had a lot of success as well. So for anyone who's listening, these views, I disagree with them.
Kevin? Yeah, I'd like to hear everyone else's thoughts. I personally cannot vouch for or against Touchstone, other than everything that I've seen has been fantastic, but I have not been able to build a project in it yet, so I would not be able to say anything without any. So
I've not built anything in it, but I've just followed Jed a lot since January when we met at the React conference. And so, I mean, I've kind of gone back and forth on that same tug of war, I guess, right? Is a hybrid app, can it perform, right? Can it do it? I have a different use case for the current React Native app that we're working on. We are actually, in that same situation that you were talking about, Charlie, where, you've got a team or set of developers that is on iOS, and then you've got another set of Android. And does it make sense to continue down that path with two sets of developers and a project manager that's essentially shuffling the information between the two? Or does it make sense to have a single code base? We actually prototyped React Native with our React Flux backend, or it was just a Flux backend. And that was all we needed to get started in our React Native app. We just included that. We created a few components to do our proof of concept, and we're shocked at how much of the code reuse we could do between web and mobile to take it, one step further. So ours, it really isn't a hybrid app. I don't know. It's more of a businessy app to manage expenses. So there's a lot of back and forth. I kind of view, and I'd like everyone else's opinion, but and it may not be the case anymore. Brochures or schedules, something that you'd download once, those seem the type of apps that would be good for hybrid. But I think with what we're seeing with React Native, it feels like you don't have that clear divide anymore, right? The lines are getting pretty blurry, and then it's soon going to be, everything could be done with React Native or something similar.
Yeah, I don't want to oversell it either. I mean, a part of that talk was about saying that there are things that web tech is good for and things that it aren't, that it's not. And as engineers, we have a whole lot of tools available to us. And if you know one well, you don't necessarily have to write it off. It was more about arguing with the sort of broad statements that you can't get a native type of experience with web technology, not necessarily that you should. I think React Native, they're not the same. And it's much easier and more powerful, particularly when you get to the level where you're dealing with deeper device integration. So when you want photos, when you want Bluetooth or
absolutely,
camera access, anything like that, that's where React Native really shines in comparison. And then performance as well. There's a lot of, if you're doing anything that's more complicated than a certain threshold, hybrid will absolutely fall over on you. So
yeah, I would have sort of a controversial view on this maybe, which is that I love the web and I grew up programming on it and stuff, but having done a couple months of React Native stuff, I think I would actually rather write a screen using React Native and that JavaScript than using HTML plus CSS plus JavaScript. Partly because it's just one thing to worry about.
I completely
all the
agree.
styles are JavaScript objects instead of sometimes I'm using CSS and sometimes I'm applying styles using JavaScript, and I have to go from dashes to camel case and things like that. And I think that I like the Flexbox model. I think it's much more simple than using floats and other things to position stuff. And so that I see Exponent and React Native as sort of being this spiritual evolution of a lot of the nice things about the web. but not necessarily the specific technologies. Like it obviously JavaScript is still a big part, but like leaving behind some of the things that are not great about HTML and CSS.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I was really intrigued when I heard Michael Chan, I believe he goes by Chantastic on Twitter, when his talk about CSS and JavaScript and what he was working with day to day. That tug of war seems to just be there. And I had not touched that because I didn't have any CSS in my components just yet. But with React Native, I had that experience of having everything in a single component, and it blew my mind. I was so blown away at how fast I was able to iterate with everything in one place. So
yeah, I started writing all of my web stuff in a very React Native like style, like using all inline styles or using like object assign and then a list of styles that sort of explicitly cascade, and using no CSS style sheets, but just using objects that get applied by React. So the code looks really a lot like React Native.
I agree. I think there's a certain solidity you get to when you're working in React Native and all of a sudden you've only got one technology to worry about. And I mean, it's obviously, it's not a 1.0 release yet. It's still got some issues, but what's there that works, you can trust it. You don't sort of have this, well, this won't work in this other version of this other browser or something like that. Like it's really nice coming from web dev to suddenly have an environment that you can actually trust. And what works, and its issues, well, you've got to work around them, but you know what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually been doing the same. After screwing around with React Native for the past couple of months, I would like my web sort of workflow to look exactly the same way. I hate opening up the style sheets now. I love using style, and I love applying the same concepts to web. And I've always thought it would be the other way around, where I could bring web stuff to mobile, but I don't know if it's just mobile or React Native or just a combination of the two. But I've been applying much more React Native to my web stuff as well.
And what's neat to me is that, you really get away from actually needing less or Sass to control your CSS because you have JavaScript, which is a programming language, which is kind of, I think, where we've always wanted to go, but we haven't been able to get there until now.
None of us just had the balls to...
Well, right, yeah, it seems like really obvious.
Into it.
Yeah, it seems real obvious. Like, oh, well, let's just take this programming language that we have and then,
Growing up, it was like the biggest deal, too. Like, keep your style sheets separate, don't inline anything, and now it's all just taken this like 180 degree turn back to like 2003.
We call it separation of technologies, right, these days?
Yeah.
To turn the conversation back to Exponent, I had sort of something else I was curious about, Charles. Have you seen App Hub or any of the other projects that are working?
I've seen
in that space.
I haven't used App Hub yet, but definitely it's like on my radar screen, keeping an eye on it. And it seems great that there's companies popping up all over the ecosystem around React Native.
I'm really excited about it. We've actually got a React Native app in production at the moment that we are pushing out with an MDM to like 1,000 iPads that are in retail locations, and we'll never see these iPads again. So we've learned firsthand like the really, really hard failings of Apple's MDM solution. Like it's just brutally bad software. We've got apps that won't update. It crashes all the time. It corrupts its database. So being able to update your apps without going through an app release, and this is theoretically easier and better than having to go through an app store review process and having your users in control of updating your apps. So it seems like the core technology of that concept, pushing new versions out, is something you'd have to have built into Exponent.
Go ahead. Sorry, what was your question?
Well, really anything you want to say about that, I'd be interested to hear. But I was wondering whether, given that we were talking before about an upgrade path to a full, iOS or Android app, keeping that sort of functionality would be awesome if that's something that you guys were.
Yeah, I think like spiritually, Exponent is like very much sort of, we think of it as an evolution of the web in a lot of ways. So the way that things work are we just keep your code. You can load code from anywhere. Like you could load a bundle from your own computer. You could load one from a web server that you have on AWS or something, or you can load one from our hosting service. But in all those cases, we just send down your bundle whenever the user loads it. And we have some caching in there, so if it hasn't changed since the last time you loaded it, it'll just send back a response that says, hey, like this is the same bundle, you don't need to download it again. But if you were to ever change an Exponent app, it like the next time a user loads it, they get the new version immediately. The same way as if you changed a website. So it's sort of just implicitly built into the platform. I think that's incredibly important. Like it just makes it so much easier to reason about what's going on with your users. So much easier to not worry about backporting fixes to old versions of things and getting calls to your API from weird old versions that you haven't thought about in a long time. And just so many things that are better about keeping everyone up to date on the latest version.
I think it's one of the real killer features of React Native that maybe doesn't get talked about so much is that you can do that. It really does change a lot of the fundamental limitations of developing mobile apps, that you can push out new versions without having this other upgrade process in the middle. Obviously, as long as they don't require any changes to the native modules or anything, but still, it's the other side of the benefits of web development, with live reloading and all the other nice things that React Native brings. The fact that you can actually push out an update and have your users receive it is a big one as well. So yeah, it'd be really cool to I guess when you get to the graduation process, have that aspect of Exponent stick around.
Yeah, I think that's likely how we would probably implement it. With the other way we could do it on Android, at least, maybe harder on iOS, is to just give you something that essentially opens up your Exponent app like within a view or something like that, so that it's literally the same experience. So I think but we want to make it as easy as possible and as seamless as possible. And I think it's like an absolute, the constantly being up to date is such a critical part of doing good development. Like I think continuous deployment, continuous integration, people are like really learning the value of all these things across all of software, not just in the React Native world.
Yeah. So what are the plans, if there are any, for Exponent as far as a revenue model? Is there one? Do you guys plan to keep it open source?
Yeah, we plan to keep most of it open source. We just want to make something really good that a lot of people use, and then we'll worry about it from there. We're a really small team, so we can work on it for a long time before we need to make money.
That's awesome.
But right now we're just focused on getting something with some traction that people are really excited about and that adds a lot of value. I think we basically will. I don't think it ever works well to charge for development tools, except in a few specific cases. So I'm 99% sure that Exponent will always be free to develop on and be a user of.
Well, we're very excited about it. I definitely think I'm going to try to go ahead and build something with it now after speaking to you about it and hearing all this stuff. It seems very, very interesting.
Cool. If you need any help, we always have some people in our Slack channel. On the website, there's instructions of how to sign up, but we're always eager to help anyone who's having trouble getting set up or anything like that.
Real quick, I guess for someone that just wants to get set up with Exponent, I guess the best way would be just to go to your website and go ahead and follow the documentation, or?
Yeah, if you go to ExponentJS.com, our website, there's like a 4-minute screencast there that just walks you through getting going. And you basically download our desktop software and download the app on your phone. And it takes just a minute or two to have code that you're editing loading live on your phone. Or if you have Xcode installed, you can also view it in the iOS simulator on your computer.
I'm going to throw one more thing out there, just about the getting started thing and Exponent. The other quick way to get started with a project, then prototype and share it, is the React Native playground. It'd be really cool to see some kind of integration between that, where if you wanted to take something from the playground and throw it into Exponent.
We've been talking to those guys, and I think we'll probably try to make our stuff work a little bit. I mean, it's already sort of compatible in the sense it's all React Native, but I think just to make stuff good for developers, I think we'd both like to sort of build into each other a little bit. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but I think it's a great idea, and I think both the React Native Playground guys and we have been thinking that as well.
Awesome.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started on the picks. I guess I'll go ahead and go first. If you have a child and you're trying to teach them math or anything like that, there's some really cool flashcards that I found on Amazon. The Brighter Child Math flashcards, they come with 6 different sets of arithmetic, addition, subtraction. But the way they're done, they're really well done, and they're only $12. So if you have like a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, I highly recommend those. Also, there's a short book called Do the Work that I've read a couple of times, and I just reread it recently. And it's kind of a book that is a very short read, and it kind of is what you might put in the realm of like a motivational type of book. But if you're looking for something like that, check it out. It's called Do the Work, and it's written by Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah, I'll go next. I want to plug, there's a complete guide to Flexbox that really helped me get started those few weeks that I had to get into how Flexbox works. It's at csstricks.com, and we'll put the link in the show notes. And the other resource is it's just called, the blog's called Use React Native, but it's reactnative.com. It's been a pretty interesting resource on what's going on in the React Native world. So that's it.
I'll go next. I guess my plugs are almost like common sense, but my homepage is React Native release notes. So I always know like if something does break, I know like immediately because that has happened to me. And then just like the React Flux Slack channel, I'm not sure if anyone's mentioned that before, but that team has like saved me in so many different times. And they've got rooms for not only React Native, but anything else that's cutting edge.
I'll jump in next with my pick this week is React Native Icons. This is actually the first native module that I installed in first React Native project that I built, and I've put it in every single one of them since. It's React-Native-Icons. It's by a guy named Corey Smith. And basically it encapsulates, at the moment, 5 different icon fonts into a single component that you can just drop in. And it's a lot of work to get images into a React Native app compared to using images on the web. And I know there are other modules out there for doing custom fonts, but this is like just being able to drop an icon component in, and you tell it the library and the icon that you want with a prop, and it appears, and you can style it, resize it, change its color. Anything that you can style with React's text, you can put on top of, like, you can use to change the way the icon looks. And it's just an incredible resource for adding icons to a project. So props to Corey for building that.
Do I get to make one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think a lot of people already subscribe to it, but Brent Vatney's React Native newsletter is a really great way to learn about all the new stuff that's going on, like cool projects or releases, any important changes. And that's available at brentvatney.ca/react-native-newsletter. And we also always put a native version up and feature it in the Exponent app as well.
I'm going to second that. It's like a fire hose of good information.
It really is good.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Well, we'll definitely link to that. Go ahead.
It comes out in the morning, so it like will totally throw you off whatever you were planning to do at that time. It's like, ooh, no, look, shiny toys, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Charlie, I really appreciate your work with Exponent, and also thank you for coming and spending an hour of your time with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun. Thanks, guys.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening to episode 2 of React Native Radio, and we'll see you next week.